Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the course of History of English Literature, New Classics to Date. Dear students, this is lecture number 24 and in today's lecture we are going to discuss Victorian Age novels. This lecture is part 2 of a series of lecture on Victorian Age novels, and in today's lecture we are going to discuss novelists, those who belong to the later Victorian Age. So, I'm your teacher Muhammad Asif Khan, lecturer, Department of English, Cohort University of Science and Technology. Dear students, I will start my lecture with giving you the sketch of discussion agenda. First of all, I will discuss the introduction to Victorian Age, and we will also have a look at the style of Victorian novels. After that, I will provide you a list of Victorian Age novelists. I have divided this list into two parts, and in the first part I will provide you the names of early Victorian Age novelists, and in the second part I will give you the names of later Victorian Age novelists. Basically, up till now we are just revising the last lecture, and this revision is to connect you with the study which we left in the last lecture. After the initial discussion, we will discuss the novelists, those who belong to the later Victorian Age, and these novelists are George Eliot, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, Robert Louis Stevenson. So these four novelists are the important novelists out of a long list of the later Victorian Age novelists, and we will focus on these four personalities. Let's start our discussion of Victorian Age. Basically, this discussion is a revision of the last lecture, and it will also recap the discussion on the overall Victorian Age. As we already know that literary moments very rarely coincide with the exact years of royal accession or royal death, and for that reason there are a number of dates of beginning of Victorian Age. But if we see that Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837 and she reigned between 1837 and 1901, the literature that is being produced during the reign of Queen Victoria is often called as Victorian Age literature. But we see that Victorian Age in literature officially starts from 1832. That is the date of the publication of volume of poetry of Alfred Tennyson. We are not making it confused whether you take 1837 as the starting point or 1832. We are well aware that these very writers are included in this era, and the others are on the margins. But the reign of Queen Victoria continued for 64 years, and for the sake of convenience, this time period is often being divided into two sub-periods: earlier Victorian period and the later Victorian period. Basically, this literature is a link between the Romantic period and the 20th century literature. So we see some important pre-Victorian writers, and these are Jane Austen and Walter Scott. These writers were having the Romantic influence, but they perfected the genre of novel because they closely observed social satire, and the second element which they included in their novels was the adventure stories. And because of their works, we see that they opened a market for the novels amongst the reading public. Before that, people were reading other materials, but Jane Austen and Walter Scott are the novelists who actually grabbed the attention of the readers, and it became one of the popular genre in the market. Now let's revise some details about the style of Victorian novels. We see that these novels are basically depicting the hard work strong determination, and the love and luck relation that wins out in the end. And we see that these novels are the portraits in which virtue would be rewarded and wrongdoers are suitably punished. So most of these novels have some central moral lesson at their heart, and they are overall presenting and just carrying some moral aims and objectives. And this literature is being created for the sake of moral revival of 19th century people. So this formula was the base for the earlier Victorian fiction, and in the later part of Victorian age we see that a number of other complexities were being included in the novels of that age, and I will further highlight these aspects when I will be discussing the most important writers of later Victorian age. So dear students, as I told you that Victorian age literature is basically relation between the Romanticism and the modern literature. So we see that in 19th century novel became the leading form of literature in English, and this was the high point in British as well as French and United States and Russian literature. So these novelists they give us a very long-lasting appeal, and their legacy is still there in our society, and people are influenced by these novelists and they are still reading the material being written by them. So the prominent novelists of earlier Victorian age, which we discussed in the last lecture, I am just giving you the list of these novelists: Charles Dickens, William Thackeray, Benjamin Disraeli, the Bronte sisters, Mrs. Gaskell, Charles Kingsley, Charles Reade, and Wilkie Collins, and Anthony Trollope. These are the important and significant novelists of the earlier Victorian age. And before giving the list of later Victorian age novelists, I will describe some of the key characteristics of the novelists of later Victorian age. The novelists of the earlier Victorian periods like Dickens, Thackeray, and the other which I listed before, they were following the tradition of English novel that was being established by Defoe, Richardson, and Fielding. So their concepts of themselves was modest, and they were just following the tradition. Novel in the Victorian age took a new trend, and the novels of this time period, from this time period I mean later Victorian age, may be called modern novels, because the new novelists of England as well as of the other countries of Europe, they began to have high ambitions, and they were basically striving for making the novel as serious as poetry. So because of their efforts, we see that novel became a medium of conveying profound thoughts, and there was both moral and aesthetic seriousness in these novels. So the novel of later Victorian age is modern novel, and it is basically an effort to make a novel as serious as poetry, and it was including those profound thoughts, because of which it took that moral and aesthetic seriousness which was not there in the earlier Victorian age novels. The list of important novelists of later Victorian age includes George Eliot, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, Robert Louis Stevenson, and George Gissing. I am just going to describe a few of the important novelists, and I will start this discussion with George Eliot. She was born on 22nd November 1819, and she died on 22nd December 1880. Her actual name was Mary Ann Evans, but she was famous by her pen name, and George Eliot is her pen name. She was a prolific personality, and she was a novelist, a poet, a journalist, a translator, and she is one of the leading writers of the Victorian era. Most of her novels are set in provincial England, the actual British land, and her novels are known for their realism and psychological insights. That is the new and modern element that is being included in these novels, and that is the psychological insight. These novels are providing the realistic psychological insight of the human personality. Dear students, she wrote 7 novels, and these novels have great importance in the history of the English novels. The first one is Adam Bede. The second one is The Mill on the Floss. Then we have Silas Marner, Romola, Felix Holt, The Radical. The Radical is the subtitle of this novel. And then we have Middlemarch and the Daniel Deronda. These are the 7 important novels of George Eliot. The second important personality among the later Victorian Age novelists is George Meredith, and he was born on 12th February 1828 and he died on 18th May 1909. He was an English novelist and a poet of Victorian era. The works of Meredith as a novelist stands apart from the fiction of that century because he seldom speaks directly, and he frequently uses maxims and aphorisms in which he presents his criticism of the contemporary life. So that is the way that he stands apart from the fiction of the century, because he was using these maxioms and aphorisms. He is not that directly speaking to the audience or to the readers. As I told you that George Meredith, he appears to stand apart from the fiction of the century because he did not follow any established tradition, and in fact he was more of a poet and philosopher than a novelist, because his attitude to the life is that of the thinker and the poet, and he is including the details in his novels like a philosopher, and he is presenting his thoughts like a poet. So he is very much different from the novelists of the earlier Victorian age. And the second distinction which he had was that he confined himself principally to the upper class of the society, and we see that he is having that link with the upper classes of the society, and in his novels he cared little for the incidents or the plots, as he is basically presenting his philosophical thoughts in his writings. So like George Eliot, he is different and modern from the previous novelists. He also has the similar characteristic of George Eliot, that he is a psychologist, and he tries to unravel the mysteries of human personality, as we see in the writings of George Eliot. So he is basically a person who is not following the established tradition of the earlier Victorian age novelists like Dickens, Thackeray, and the others who were just following the tradition being set by Defoe, Richardson and Fielding. So now let's move towards another important personality, and one of the prominent personalities among the English novelists, and he is Thomas Hardy. He was born on 2nd June 1840 and he died on 11th January 1928. He was an English novelist and a poet, and initially we see that Romanticism influenced him both in his novels and in his poetry, and he was very critical to the Victorian society, and especially he was concerned about the declining status of rural people in Britain. So dear students, the famous novels of Thomas Hardy are Far from the Madding Crowd, that was published in 1874. Then we have The Mayor of Casterbridge. It was published in 1886. One of the very important novels in the history of English novels is Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and that was published in 1891. Then we have Jude the Obscure, that was published in 1895. So Thomas Hardy is the person who actually made novel as serious a medium as poetry. And we see that after Thomas Hardy, novel became a genre which could deal with the fundamental problems of the life. So in his novels, we can say that his novels can be compared to the great poetical tragedies, because the characters in his novels, they rise to the great tragic heights, as we see in the tragedies of the last centuries. So he has that great and inborn and natural sympathy and sincerity for the poor, and sometimes we see that on account of his that love of mankind, he disobeyed the rules of the art. So Hardy is the person who basically made a novel and that instrument which can present the fundamental issues of human life, because he was having that compassion for mankind, and he presented all these things in such a way that he made novels a great poetical tragedies. Dear students, that is Thomas Hardy. And now let's move toward the last last novelist which I am discussing in this lecture, and that is Robert Louis Stevenson. He was born on 3rd November 1850, and he died on 3rd December 1894. He was basically a Scottish novelist and a poet and a travel writer. His most important novels are Treasure Island, very famous among the children, and often this very novel is being included in the courses of the lower grades of the kids. And we also have Kidnapped, important novel, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll, and the last important novel of Robert Louis Stevenson is Mr. Hyde. So these are the important novels of Robert Louis Stevenson. Now let's look at the important characteristics. He was basically a great storyteller, and the second important thing is that he was a romancer. So his contribution to the English novel is that he introduced the element of romantic adventures in the novel. So he is the one who rediscovered the art of narrative, and he is the one who rediscovered the art of conscious and clever calculations in telling a story. So he is the one who achieved the effect of clarity and suspense in the novels, and therefore this is the birth of novel of action. And these are the characteristics of the novels of Robert Louis Stevenson, and he is basically famous for his storytelling, and he is famous for the rediscovery of art of narrative, in which he achieved the effect of clarity and suspense in novel. And he is often declared as the one who is the person because of whom there is the birth of novel of action. Dear students, after this discussion, now I hope that you are having overall understanding of Victorian age novels, because in the first part we discussed the style and the important novelist of the earlier Victorian age, and in the second part we discussed the novelists of later Victorian age. And these novelists of the later Victorian age, they brought the modern trends in the novel, and we see that they were writing with high ambitions to to make a novel as serious as poetry, and these novelists are conveying profound philosophical thoughts in their novels, and these novels are having moral and aesthetic seriousness in it. So that is the overall discussion which we did, and we studied in today's lecture important novelists such as George Eliot, George Meredith, Thomas Hardy, and the last one is Robert Louis Stevenson. Thank you very much for listening passionately. See you in the next lecture.